Welcome back on this Friday. Appreciate you joining us. Jim Coyle with you as always here on Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Joined now by Zach Osterman from the Indy Stars. Zach, how are you, sir?
No, I'm good. Sorry, I got a new computer and I'm struggling to figure out my camera, so I think I might just be a black void today.
No worries, man. No worries. How's everything going with you?
I can't complain. It's Friday. It's sunny. There's worse things.
Absolutely. Kids are all your kids are not in school yet, are they?
One is.
Yeah, I know that Chronic was very happy to get his shot off to school. To start. Lots going on. Of course, most of it centers around realignment. Of course, it's been the gigantic story, especially with the Big Ten being squarely in the middle of that. But one of the things I was talking about earlier, and I asked Tom Allen on Monday, if this is not a good thing for Indiana, because you're escaping the death blow, the four-finger death punch blow every year of Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State, and whoever they have to get from the west side. But to loosen the schedule up and to give them a little bit of breathing room. And I think he agrees with that, at least from his response. And I mean, I think that's the case as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to this, and I think there is an extent to which Indiana will look at this and say something to the effect of, "Oh, come on." On the other hand, I think probably anybody you talk to in Indiana will have recognized, even when we started talking about moving away from divisions 3, 4, 5 years ago, that at some point the conference was going to expand again. At some point we were going to kind of continue this contraction process, and it was going to lead us to a place where one way or another we were going to see conferences get stronger, and conferences like, for example, the Big Ten just kind of keep adding at the top. I think the question, if you're Indiana, is basically just the balance of kind of the short and medium term gain versus loss, and then the long term gain versus loss. And there's for a long time been this perception that Indiana was essentially sort of in this protected class because it was in the Big Ten. And yes, it could struggle in the Big Ten, but it was better to be sort of inside the cocoon of one of the two major conferences, super conferences, whatever term you want to use, rather than on the outside and trying to maneuver around without a lot of leverage, related to your football program. I just think it's if you're Indiana, to be honest, more than anything else, I think you're in a position right now where you just kind of have to look at it and say, we are in the Big Ten, and that is good. And everything else, we just kind of need to take on the chin and figure out as time goes on, if you understand what I'm saying. And I think that's probably the best you can do.
Yeah, well, we see, I've talked about this a little bit ago as well. I use in negotiations to eliminate the third game in the series with Louisville, which is a smart move, because I would not bet against Jeff Brom in Louisville 3 years from now. Indiana already has a tough enough road to hoe with 9 conference games. Playing a 10th Power 5 opponent like that does not make things easier for them, a la Cincinnati here lately. So getting out of that series will be definitely beneficial to Indiana.
Yeah, so remember that a lot of this is because I don't know why we didn't learn from COVID that you don't need to schedule these games, that you can build a football schedule in just a few months, the way you build a basketball schedule. But one way or another, a lot of this is remnant of a time when the Big Ten was looking at a 4-team playoff, and the Big Ten bet on not only 9 conference games, but then this requirement that you had to play a 10th high major opponent, conference opponent, on your schedule somewhere in the non-conference, because the Big Ten's thought process was essentially, we want the the strength of schedule. We want to have strong schedules, and we want to, be in a position where our champion and maybe even our second place team are, have such impressive resumes they can get into the playoff. Now, a variety of factors I think are coming into play. Number one, you've expanded your TV inventory so much with your TV partners that I think you can reasonably look at, your relationships with Fox, with CBS, NBC, et cetera, and say, hey, listen, we're giving you, we're giving you all you need here. That's number one. Number two, the playoff is obviously bigger now. It's been expanded to 12 teams. And so you don't feel like maybe it's such an exclusive club that you're going to need these elite resumes anymore. And number three, and I don't mean to sound flippant about, IU football or whatever, but I think what the Big Ten has also probably appreciated with programs outside of, let's say, the ones that we would consider annual playoff contenders, and the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Penn States, obviously bringing in a USC now, et cetera. I think that what the Big Ten has kind of realized is there's no real reason for you to require any of those teams to do anything more than, quite frankly, schedule the easiest path to bowl eligibility, because that's more money for the conference in terms of bowl payouts. And there's really, what is the conference gaining at this point? Again, especially as it's expanded its inventory to include a whole bunch of new schools now in conference play. What is the conference gaining by forcing Indiana to play Missouri, or forcing Purdue to play Syracuse, or forcing, Illinois to go play Georgia Tech? There's just not much in that for the conference, frankly. And so I think that you're going to see more of this, not necessarily schools like trying to get out of this series or that series specifically, but I do think you're going to see more of, frankly, teams just not scheduling quite so difficult now. And I'm rambling and I'm speculating at this point. I do think you might still see an Indiana hold on to a Notre Dame series, for example. There's value in that. There's a lot of value, even if you're going to be an underdog in those games. It's Notre Dame. You'll be on primetime TV. It's a big matchup. You can sell it to recruits, etc. And I think the other bet that the Big Ten is justifiably making is that even if it sort of removes some of these scheduling requirements, the likes of, let's say, a Penn State and Ohio State, they're still going to be playing in those big time games, because ultimately in their minds, they want to be on ESPN, or they want to be on Fox, or they want to be in prime time, etc. And so you don't have to worry about them taking the path of least resistance. And there's really not a lot of value in forcing anybody else not to. And so I think you're going to see more teams pulling back from some of these series.
Yeah, because if Indiana can align themselves and get to a point of being competitive, and where back in the days where those were just 3 wins, the non-con games, if they can get back to having that and just having to win 3 conference games, they stand a very good chance of being competitive year in, year out to make a bowl game, which Indiana football fans would probably be pretty happy with that.
And again, it would be good for the conference too. Like the conference gets the bowl payout as long as the spot is filled. It doesn't matter how somebody gets there. It doesn't matter if they're 6-6 or 7-5, or what their sort of hypothetical strength of schedule would be if they went to, if they were put in front of the playoff committee at 8-4 or whatever. The Big Ten is just going to be happy to have the bowl payout, and justifiably so. And the school is as well, because that's more money. The bowl payouts in the Big Ten are spread out equally, but that's still more money in the overall coffer for everybody else to get. That's still another postseason opportunity. And of course, we can get into some more, philosophical discussions. What does the bowl field look like in 10 years? What's the postseason look like? How is that all structured? But that's kind of its own thing. But one way or another, there's really no loser in looking at the teams outside of the ones that you would consistently expect to compete for a playoff, especially an expanded playoff. To look at those teams and to say, hey, just kind of do what you want and give it your best shot. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to maybe take that approach, frankly.
Well, this is the Bill Mallory approach. When he was on that run of going to 6 bowl games in 8 years, they would win their 3 non-con games, and then you squeeze out 3 conference wins. And back then, I don't think they had the bowl eligibility thing. I can't remember all the way back then. But anyway, that was kind of the secret formula for those guys.
Well, and it obviously it was different then too, because you were playing an uneven number of games, you're playing an odd number of games. There was a lot more sort of clarity of if you're 6 and 5, you're bowl eligible. If you're 5 and 6, you're not. And there were fewer bowl games then too. It's worth remembering that there were fewer. Just to you didn't. I mean, I can remember even my junior year of college when Indiana went to the Insight Bowl. There was some question if Indiana had finished 6 and 6, whether there would have been a spot in the bowl field for Indiana. Whereas now, basically any team that goes 6 and 6 is going to get into a bowl out of a major conference. So, I mean, and again, this speaks to the fact, I'm not that old. I was only in, the season we're talking about was only 16 years ago. 16 years from now, the bowl field might look completely different. And we're having a totally different conversation yet again. But again, I think if you're Indiana, your approach here just needs to be, let's just find a way to be as competitive as we can. And if that means going a little bit more shy on the non-conference scheduling side, then so be it. And I don't know if it's my place to make this judgment or not. I don't really understand people who say, oh, Indiana's scared or Indiana's this or Indiana's that. I just don't understand why basically you should look at programs like Indiana and say they have to try more than is necessary, essentially.
I don't want to say there's pressure on Tom Allen, but there's somewhat pressure on Tom Allen to have a good year this year. He's in his 7th season here. Does this, with what's coming in the future and knowing how it's going to loosen up a little bit, does this give him an extra year, do you think, no matter what happens this year?
I don't think moving the Louisville series alone does.
No. I just mean loosening up the possibility of being able to probably be more apt to make a bowl than they have been recently.
Well, certainly, but I think you still got to do it. I mean, ultimately, I don't. There are things that fans remember about seasons, and there are things they don't. No, nobody's going to remember I would bet you the average fan doesn't remember that Indiana was 4 and 6 going into the last 2 games of the 2015 season. The average fan just remembers that they went 6 and 6 and they went to a bowl game. I don't think most fans kind of look at these things and say, well, it was this, but it could have been that, and that would have been much worse. And so I think functionally, making it potentially easier to get to a bowl game. Sure. Now, we started this conversation by pointing out that the Big Ten is just generally getting a lot more competitive in the coming years. And so we can talk about non-conference scheduling, but we may be in a situation where suddenly the conference road is a lot more difficult to hoe for Indiana than it's been. But I think certainly there is absolutely nothing bad about this from Indiana's perspective. I think the issue you're going to have is just, can you, if you're Indiana, can you get to a bowl game? Because you still got to do it.
Right. And also doing away with the divisions, 18 teams, there's going to be 10 teams that you don't play. There's going to have to be a bunch of tiebreaker scenarios I would imagine.
I mean, I go back to sort of the postseason thing, and because I think that there is people always annually people say there are too many bowl games. This is too many bowl games, and the never is there a more apt sort of place for the response that this is all a function of the market, and the market is just telling you what it wants than bowl games. If bowl games were cheaper, or if bowl games weren't making money, I should say, then they'd stop having bowl games. The cold reality of this is that bowl games exist because there is an interest in bowl games existing. And if the Pinstripe Bowl or the, whatever we're calling the Motor City Bowl now, or the Bahamas Bowl weren't making money, they wouldn't have it. And so the other thing I come back to is, when you have these conversations about what does the postseason look like in, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, then, maybe quite frankly, it's easier to make a bowl game out of the Big Ten, even as we talk about these conferences getting more competitive, these conferences getting more, getting deeper and all those different kinds of things. Maybe something changes and it's a lot easier to get to the postseason out of these conferences moving forward. I don't know. I just know that Indiana is, again, just needs to be in the business of get there and worry about the rest later.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. How much pressure is on Tom Allen this season for Indiana to make a bowl game, say?
I think, my sort of rote response to these questions, because everybody asks, is essentially that I don't think Indiana is going to be in a position where it wants to move on from Tom Allen at the end of this season unless things have just gone really, really wrong. Having said that, I do think that there comes a time and a place where you either have a fan base or you don't. And if you lose your fan base, it can be exceptionally difficult to get it back. And I think that this might be a season that ultimately we look back on and say either Tom Allen kind of got some of that momentum from 2018, 19, 20 back on his side, or things really started to calcify against him. The other piece of this was it did feel, frankly, like Indiana was in a position where, build on a positive season this year, and you can, expect a much more sort of friendly or, manageable schedule next year. Well, now that's off the table. Now that's not something that's going to happen. And we don't know what next year's schedule is going to look like. And Indiana surely could, find its way into a comfortable schedule again next season, but you can't count on it in the way that you knew what you were looking at out of this season going into next season. And so, again, it just does feel like this is the opportunity to get some of that momentum back in a really meaningful way before things, like I said, start to maybe calcify on you a little bit.